Hi everybody. I want to talk about Mars in Virgo. This has been a really intense transit for me. Virgo's on my 4th house, and so very much about the inner life, and certain revelations about Virgo really holding a few keys for myself personally as being something, revealing something about the core foundational nature of myself as a human being, my human personality, which is very much a 4th house subject matter. Yes, the self is found through the sun sign and through the identity aspect of the rising sign, but this really deep interiority, and Virgo with some of its connections to sort of OCD, perfectionism, and this the challenge of materialism and the kind of anxiety that rises out of that. I'm going to flesh that out in a little bit, but these have been really there's been some openings of some really deep and difficult places to traverse, and it's been very, very insightful in terms of digging a little deeper into understanding Virgo and the challenge of this very deep materialistic sign, and understanding the Pisces Virgo axis from a deeper level. So I want to talk about Mars in Virgo, what I've been observing, and also keeping it within the realm of an esoteric perspective. So before we do that, I want to do a little refresh on Virgo and Mars. Let's start with Mars. When we're approaching Mars esoterically, it becomes very, very important what Mars is doing in the transits. And this specifically becomes true once someone is initiated into discipleship and it passes through into the 2nd degree. For some of my regular viewers, there'll be a few of you responding strongly to Mars transits. Some of you will be beginning to go through the tests of Mars, which are really the tests of Scorpio, which Mars co-rules exoterically and rules esoterically. So Scorpio and discipleship, was the sign that rules discipleship, and the great challenge of the burning through the astral layers, Scorpio ruling the 7 astral subplanes. So Mars, in its tendency to create conflict and separate, which is a traditional signification, is actually, it serves its purpose occultly to highlight dualities that are requiring resolution. And those are the tests. So where is there a push and pull, craving, aversion, astral polarization in whatever way, shape or form. And let's think here about Mars also ruling Aries, the esoteric rule of Aries being Mercury. So the evolution of the Aries challenge with conflict is to awaken to the nature of the conflict and then octave up into Mercury and then mediate and then harmonize. So communicate, liaise, and come to a resolution of a conflict. So in that same way, Mars and Mercury have that a little bit of a partnership function, not exactly, but in a sort of loose way, where Mars is going to highlight those dualities, and it requires us to then move into the higher octaves of Mercury, which is also the hierarchical ruler of Scorpio, sign of discipleship. So the messenger of the gods, then able to fluidly pass through consciousness at all these multiple levels of being. Okay, so that's Mars. So Mars becomes very important in terms of its transits, and I've noticed since entering discipleship, not that I was watching the transits from the beginning because I came to study esoteric astrology a bit later, but as the years have gone past, and particularly in the last 2 and 3 years, gradually the Mars transits have been becoming more and more obvious. Before it was more relevant in some signs and through some more active houses, and now it's almost every time Mars is going into its new sign, it's really concentrated, focused lessons of challenge. So that's Mars. Virgo is the sign of the mother, of matter. DK says that Virgo, along with the sign Cancer, are 2 of the oldest signs in our solar system, or as part of it's beyond our solar system, but as part of this great pocket of universe that we find ourselves in. And they have this connection back to the first solar system, which was really to develop the 3rd aspect of deity, so matter. So the lesser octave of Virgo, in terms of its perfectionism, its criticalness, and obsession with details, that's part of the way in which the mother principle or matter veils consciousness. It's partly why Venus has its fall in Virgo from an occult standpoint, because the Venus being the higher octave of Earth and the divine, like the higher soul self, let's say, of the Earth, and ruling that which builds the bridge with the Antakarana, higher self, soul, fifth ray, Ajna center, that falls in the sign of materialism, where it becomes about too nitpicky. So exoterically, we say someone with Venus in Virgo may be too perfectionistic, too critical in relationships, or maybe in some cases that perfectionism landing on the body matter in some way, like having an eating disorder or something like that. So Virgo, esoterically, rules the refinement and the technical precision of the cultivating of the personality to accurately reflect the divine purpose. And that's somewhat true of all earth signs. So with Virgo, you have, and we see this perfectionistic or technical brilliancy in Virgo anyway, even exoterically. But when it's being moved through, when it's being moved by consciousness, it's about the synthesis of all of those vehicles and the bringing together. This is the embodiment piece that the feminine principle lays so much emphasis upon. Okay, you've got consciousness, but how are you living that? How is that being incarnated? Virgo is really where love matures. Love matures into practical, embodied wisdom of love. And that's a very different expression from exoteric Virgo, where actually there can be a big lack of love. It's the matter principle veils the Christ child. Now, what I've been finding with Virgo is, and this is something that Alan Oken talked about, where there's often a deep inner experience of chaos in Virgo. And that is what leads to that anxious compulsion to perfect. And this is where we get the OCD quality. Or, okay, I have a distressing inner experience at some level. And then, okay, so I need to do this, so I feel better. And of course, sometimes there are practical things that we need to do, and it makes sense that if you've got an untidy space and that stresses you out, then if you tidy it up, that feels better. So there's obviously practical ways in which that plays itself out. But when we're talking about this more of a deeper consciousness problem, it's really the problem that is almost latent or inherently implied within the problem of matter. Not that matter is a problem, but insofar as the creation of matter and its movement away from consciousness, or first developing as separate from consciousness, is it's impenetrated by loving consciousness. This is where we get the virgin idea, virgin matter. It's impenetrated or unpenetrated by consciousness. Consciousness which is found in polar opposite sign Pisces, for instance, or from the prior sign in zodiacal order, Leo. So the deep problem of Virgo is meeting very difficult states of being that are found in the multiplicity of the bodies, mental, emotional, physical. The moon is the esoteric ruler of Virgo, and the moon here really encompassing all sheaths of matter, substance, which is why Virgo is the ruler of the healing arts, because it brings everything together into synthesis. But at the core of this Virgo problem is the great pain of the mother in being unloved. That is the place where consciousness has not penetrated. And while this isn't necessarily a new thing to me, I've been touching on layers of this that have gone so much deeper. Whereas in the early phases, it was obviously touching layers within those several, going deeper into the astral subplanes. And there's obvious feeling states. Oh, I feel abandoned from this childhood wound, cry it out. But during this transit, I've been touching on places that are so deep and foundational to substance and to psyche. And what you see, this is again thinking about the multiplicity of the bodies and the construction of the personality vehicle itself. Here we go, moon, and the astral, physical, mental. The way in which the system constructs itself out of that pain. So again, thinking of the OCD thing, I've got a deep feeling of unsettledness and a core inner experience of I am not okay, some angle of that. And then I need to go and do this. And it's a very, again, it's dense. They're talking about matter here. This is the oldest aspect of being in which we experience it. It runs so deep. And in the mercurial influence of Virgo, Mercury being its exoteric ruler, and really highlighting the third ray aspect of the mind. And of course, Virgos are very mentally discriminative. That is the evolution out of Pisces as well, undifferentiated into mercurial discrimination, this, getting a bit more practical, which is the main point of development for earth signs also generally. But this Mercury piece, in terms of the way in which the mind is that last point of disassociation. And I've talked about this elsewhere in terms of why it is that the mental body initiation, the third degree, is in fact the third, and why is it that last one to touch on, and why physical and emotional happen prior to, although they can sort of glob together a bit and sort of be overlapping. But the mind is that most difficult one to release. And again, for the same reason that Saturn is that final dweller on the threshold. And there is a loose association here, a connection, because exoteric Mercury has a certain Saturnian quality, has a third ray kind of expression. Saturn is the mind as well. So the restrictive aspect of mind and mentality means stuck in the mind. This is where we get Virgo in its critical nature. But the invitation here, because then what is the solution, or what are we trying to do with consciousness here, is to withdraw. And some of the withdrawal of energy, this is very much a Martian theme, because you have to pull psychic astral energy, that sixth ray and the astral body and the solar plexus, that Mars rules, to withdraw it from the forms that have been developed out of separation from the truth, out of separation from love. And I'm finding that this has been very difficult because of the kind of deep anxiousness and unsettledness and the sensitivity of the nervous system, and having really touched on, since becoming a mother myself, Virgo again for myself rules the 4th house of motherhood, and Mercury is in my 12th house, so this the mental illness in the lineage, and having a very severe and very challenging postpartum period, really accessing that kind of mood disorder kind of disturbance in my psyche. I'd worked with trauma before. I'd passed through difficult feeling states before. I'd let out rage and anger and things that can look really unstable when you're in the process of. But this was very different, touching on something where it feels like all of the bodies of interrelationship are just like fundamentally glitching almost. It's a very, very deep and very subtle disturbance. And of course, we have a relationship with Cancer here, and that ties in with the astral component of the archetypes. And when you have an archetypal disturbance, and how an archetypal disturbance it correlates or has a connection to the physiology and the development of the instincts and all of this. So it's very complex, and there are many different moving pieces to it. But this deep inner anxiety coming from a very deep, deep, deep place. And we know that the fear that we experience as human beings, fear as an instinctual reality, is a big mystery behind fear, I suppose. And I can only speak to it a little bit because I haven't spent too much time thinking about it. But fear is this necessary thing that we opt into to incarnate into form. It's something about how matter, originally coming from spirit, of course, but to become dense and into a concretized form, it sort of slows right down, and there's some kind of, the fear, it plays into how everything slows down, so that incarnation and matter and the body can be part of this, can come into being. So point being that the fear is very deep. It's this, But the invitation, again, is to bring consciousness into these areas. And the tricky thing is to really spend time withdrawing from anything. And you have to get really subtle and honest and nitpicky and self-reflective about this. Any movement out into reality, to act, to perform, to do, to create even. Of course, I use the example of like tidying a room or getting OCD about something like that as the typical kind of example that we might expect. But it could be anything. For me, I've had to withdraw from ways in which I participate in my own creative process, because there's still been a distortion in how that mind is still reacting from these subtle places of deep inner anxiety and fear and terror. And you have to, it's not obvious, is my point. You have to really go, okay, where is this coming from? Is this coming from a place of rest and okayness? So the big invitation for Virgo, for the Mars in Virgo transit, but also just Virgo generally, is to slow down the movement of consciousness through all the bodies, and to actually touch on that deep inner place of discomfort and allow for consciousness, for Christ, for the soul, to imbue itself down into substance, and to accept the consequences of that process, which can often mean going into another kind of yin territory or process. We talked about this with Jupiter in Cancer, which is also a feminine sign again. But the way in which it's different here is we're speaking more about the stilling of the mutable physical aspects of the body, of the mind, of this movement, this material movement that happens. And there is a connection with Virgo and Libra too, Libra being not just the next sign, but DK says at some point these two are going to blend. They're going to be some of the first two to blend, Libra and Virgo, and then Pisces and Aries. And Libra is a sign of meditation and reflection and pause, and where we come to wed with the higher self. And as a result of that, we then imbue substance with the divine form, just as we do in Leo. Awaken to the higher self in Leo, or the deeper self, Neptunian self, and then the Uranian self, incarnate that through Virgo. But there's a similar thing going on with Libra as well. There's a consummation between the higher and lower selves that happens. And then the embodiment of that law, where it comes to the healing of and the respect of and the application of love towards matter and substance. Virgo also having connection with the 6th house to, work, service, but all the lesser kingdoms in nature, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, just as we do in our relationship to our own bodies. What is the relationship of consciousness to the mind, to the emotional body, to the physical body? There we have the association with healing and diet and exercise, of course, that we have with Virgo, or the perfectionism. But that perfectionism becoming rather than the neurotic perfectionism of the personality, that has to be surrendered into loving consciousness. And the love has to be accessed first. The okayness with being has to be accessed first. And that deeper inner interior rooting of consciousness has to be grounded. And in that, then the allowance of the reconstitution of forms, which would then be virgin matter being immaculately conceiving, so to speak, being imbued with consciousness. And as a result, she can actually start to, just as Cancer does, spin the webs of creative substance, of matter, so that it is the reflection of the form. Or rather, the form is the reflection of consciousness. And this is also why at this particular iteration of development, at the bigger level, Virgo has raised 2 and 6 expression through it. We also see it embodied through the Mary Magdalene, with the oiling and the washing and the kissing of the feet. So she is that counterpart to the Christ in Pisces. She brings it all the way down. And here we have the great wisdom of love, coming back to this original point I made, but the embodiment of love into its feminine expression. This is why it was such a perversion when the Mary Magdalene thing was twisted, because we see in Mary Magdalene, through her devotion and tenderness. This is the true experience of Virgo esoterically. And you can see it where sometimes we see with Virgo, yeah, it's that bitchy, perfectionistic, critical, can be nasty, which is also in part a playing out of that feminine shadow. But esoterically, it is an extremely loving sign. It becomes much more like a Pisces. And of course, we know, as we've discussed elsewhere, especially esoterically, the two opposites become one. So they are two sides of the same coin. And part of that development and maturation is the synthesis between those opposites. So we may experience loving consciousness in Pisces, but we incarnate that into Virgo. Just as we're completely lost to substance in Virgo. That's Madonna's song, Material Girl. I think she was a Virgo rising, a prominent Virgo somewhere, right? And then breaking out into a global, not global, but universal mystic consciousness. But the two become the one. So for the standard exoteric orientation, let's say with Mars through Virgo, we would say, it actually pairs quite well with the exoteric rulership of Mercury in the sign Virgo, because there's just a natural quickening and capacity to articulate one's vision and goal. Not too dissimilar from Mars in Capricorn, which is the sign of exaltation. That is where the goal can be realized. So we discipline the emotional body to come to achieve the goal. But it's actually quite similar in Virgo, but more on that orientation towards process and procedure and perfectionism, a little bit more of that mutable energy there. So exoterically, that's the case also. And in the spiritual instance, we have the quickening, mutable Earth, and Mercury, the quickening of those processes of purification and embodiment found in Virgo. So natal Mars in Virgo, from an esoteric standpoint, can be quite a beautiful placement, because we can see someone who has a natural devotional orientation and a love towards the applying of love to the form, through the perfection of the body, through the understanding of how the systems come together, through the healing arts, something like this. Although we can also see the shadow side of that, which would be similar to just a kind of devotional love, fanatical intensity or obsession with perfectionism from the exoteric standpoint. But from the consciousness standpoint, from the esoteric standpoint, a very beautiful placement for Mars to be natally. So opportunity for this transit to, yes, think about how all the bodies come together, similar to Cancerian investigations where we say, what do we really need? But Cancer is a bit more of that watery feeling of nourishment. So listening to music, creating those rituals that put you in a space of wholeness during the day. It's a bit more of that emotional and watery energy, unsubstantial, or not, it's not as material. It's much more of an emotional and heart-centered experience. Whereas in Virgo, we're talking about the needs and the nourishment from that technical standpoint, and to really be practical about what one's needs are. Is it really practical to be reaching for this great goal right now without first taking care of this thing? Virgo will really ask us to really attend to and take care of exactly what is needed for the love to mature, so that the psyche can mature, so that the personality can mature. Because there's no point in going up, up, up. You have to go up and level out this way as well. And we, in our yang-centered world, we tend to prefer the expansion. But this is just as important, if not more important, because if you keep going up and up and up without leveling out here, eventually it's going to come crashing down, because you haven't evolved and matured and nourished those forms of the body enough, and the psyche and the mind, to be able to hold stably and with maturity the consciousness that's been received, or the life force that's been received through big awakenings, whatever. So again, if we have a revelation of Christ in Pisces, it's about, okay, what does that look like in my daily life? What does that look like with how I use my mind, what I'm putting into my body? Am I taking care of things? Following the Libra aspect too, law and order and truth in Libra. How am I embodying that truth in Virgo? if I have an awareness of the law of love, am I living that through every single body of nature? Am I living that in myself, or am I neglecting to deal with, which is the same as saying, is my consciousness, let's say as a masculine or Piscean component, is it failing to go to this area that it really needs to go into? That is the real union of the opposites in terms of the greater seventh ray aspect, perhaps, or fourth ray as well, the union of the opposites. Where is that? And think about Shakespeare in Taming of the Shrew, right? And she's kind of wild and crazy, but this is kind of that neurotic feminine thing. But she hasn't been penetrated by consciousness. So we've all got these pockets that haven't been touched. And when we touch them, they're full of rage, or when we touch them, they're full of anxiety and neuroses. It's the OCD. We need to be able to penetrate those pieces of ourselves as well in our lives. And we look to the ground to do that. That's Mary Magdalene at the feet. We look to what is right here. What is right here? Okay, great vision over there. Great creative project over there. Great aspiration there. Okay, but what about here? Because I need to level out at all these different pieces. All of these different things have to come together. Jupiter is the hierarchical ruler of Virgo, remember? The incarnation of love. The bringing together of all the bodies, synthesizing spiritual love, second ray, love, wisdom, spiritual purpose being fully brought together with all the forms coming into integrity here. Okay, so these are just different angles of the Virgo revelation that have been going on for me during this Mars in Virgo transit. A little bit more awareness of the busyness of the mind and having to really stop and pull it into a kind of silence to really meet the pain underneath all of that mercurial noise. That's the invitation. That's something to bear in mind during this transit, and to think about, where are we being shown dualities between certain aspects of our material and human existence, and where do we need to basically mature rather than go, I don't want to deal with that, or I wish my life wasn't like this, or I wish I didn't have that problem. That's that immature masculine, the immature consciousness turning away, rather than being humbled to what needs to be penetrated and loved and brought into integrity and synthesized. Okay, thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.